People who consume between 1 and 2 cups of dark leafy greens every day have brains that perform up to 11 years younger. I like to say that exercise is like taking a shotgun to your problems because it affects so many different pathways. Meta-analyses show that on a night of shortened sleep, we tend to consume about 400 additional calories the next day.
Max, about 2 weeks ago, you posted this video on your YouTube channel talking about a 5-ingredient longevity salad. I think this is a powerful thing that most of us can adopt right away. So I want to get into this to kick off, starting with the first ingredient being dark leafy greens. Let's talk about why that's so important for longevity.
Yeah, I love this. And this is definitely an area where carnivores that are watching this are going to disagree with me. So it's kind of odd to say that in 2022, that dark leafy greens are a controversial recommendation to make. But if you look at a paper published by a nutrition research scientist named Ty Beal, he was one of the authors on the paper. He's become a friend of mine. He found in his studies that dark leafy greens are one of the most nutrient-dense foods available to us. That's not because that they're a good source of protein or that they contain a broad array of nutrients, but they do contain some, and they're very calorie sparse. So for one, they're a good source of folate. Folate is actually named for foliage. So dark leafy greens it's well known that they're a good source of that micronutrient, which is really important for good mental health, good brain health, for supporting methylation in the body. Some people that carry a gene mutation for their in the MTHFR gene actually require, or it's thought that they require an additional folate boost to support methylation and keep levels of homocysteine down. And there are some studies that show that when supplementing with folate and vitamin B12, people can slow brain atrophy in the latter years. So I think dark leafy greens, for that reason alone, because they're a good folate source, they also contain vitamin C, calcium. I'm not too concerned about the anti-nutrients, particularly in the context of a mixed diet from dark leafy greens. Or I get asked a lot about oxalates. If you're not at risk for kidney stones, if you haven't had them before, or if nobody in your family has had them, then I don't think that's a risk. I wouldn't go overboard with the raw spinach per se, but I think for most people, the benefits outweigh the risks. And we see observationally from research out of Rush University that people who consume between 1 and 2 cups of dark leafy greens every day have brains that perform up to 11 years younger. That could be attributed to healthy user bias, just to be clear, meaning that people who eat a salad every day that's probably a person who is, more broadly speaking, a health conscious person. Nonetheless, I don't think that there's any downside, and I do think that there's a lot of upside to be gained from regularly incorporating dark leafy greens. Kale, for example, a lot of people hate on kale. Kale's not the only option, but it's a great source of carotenoids. Carotenoids are not an essential nutrient, so when talking about the nutrient density of dark leafy greens, carotenoids aren't even considered, but they're one of the most valuable classes of nutrients in dark leafy greens for their ability to support and protect neural tissue, which includes both your eyes and your brain. And kale is one of the top sources. You get about 25 grams of both lutein and zeaxanthin in, I believe, about a cup of cooked kale or something like that, which would probably be, 1 to 2 cups of raw kale. You don't have to eat kale. That is to say that dark leafy carotenoids are found in all sorts of dark leafy greens, whether it's kale, arugula, which contains them, also nitrates. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good to be gained from dark leafy greens.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a synergy between the dark leafy greens and the second ingredient, which is extra virgin olive oil, when it comes to the carotenoids and helping with absorption.
Absolutely, yeah. So carotenoids are fat soluble. So if you're not consuming a fat source concurrent with the dark leafy greens, they're flowing through you. Some of the most valuable compounds in those dark leafy greens. So you want to always consume, if you're having a salad, a fat source. Now, if the salad that you're eating is part of a mixed meal and you're having a side of say wild salmon or grass-fed beef or even a handful of nuts, then you don't necessarily have to worry about putting oil in your salad. But if you're eating it by itself for lunch, for example, and your protein choice is, say, grilled chicken breast, right, which is a fairly lean protein source, you definitely want to add fat to your salad so that you absorb and integrate those carotenoids. So yeah, extra virgin olive oil would be my choice. It's a staple oil in the Mediterranean region of the world. That's the only type of oil that they're using. And humans have been making and using extra virgin olive oil for thousands of years. I'm a huge fan of the phytochemicals found in it. One in particular is called oleocanthal, which has been shown to be as anti-inflammatory as low-dose ibuprofen, which is pretty dope. And it's the staple oil used as part of the Mind Diet. The Mind Diet is a dietary pattern. It's an imperfect dietary pattern that was devised at Rush University, but the only oil that is recommended in the Mind Diet is extra virgin olive oil. And this is a diet that has been purported to slow cognitive decline and protect brain health. So I'm a huge fan of extra virgin olive oil. It's the only oil that I use. And also it's a big myth. A lot of people are under the misconception that you can't cook with extra virgin olive oil. You can at low to medium temperatures. So I'm a huge fan of it.
If you're going to cook at high temps, what oil do you switch to?
I would use avocado oil in that case, which is very chemically stable, monounsaturated, predominant fat. It's got it's basically like, it's a very heat stable oil. It's not as ideal as extra virgin olive oil. But I don't know, you could actually make the argument that extra virgin olive oil is safe at high temperatures as well. The only issue is that there's no point to using extra virgin olive oil because you're going to change the flavor profile of it. And so avocado oil, it's a much more neutral fat. And then if you are cooking something at high temperatures, I would use the avocado oil to cook it, and then I would finish it with the extra virgin olive oil if the recipe calls for that. Yeah.
I like that. And when it comes to EVOO, let's talk about quality because, people these days in the health and wellness space, it's really blowing up the fact that this is a good quality oil and it promotes health. But now when you go to the grocery store, it's like there's a whole wall of different olive oils to pick from. So, and I've even heard some of them contain different oils or they've been watered down. They've been tampered with, basically. So how does somebody go about picking a good one?
Yeah, Jesse, I think, what I look for is I try not to drive myself too crazy, first of all. And here's basically what it comes down to. Extra virgin olive oil is a fresh fruit juice. And so you want to think about it in terms of, you want to make sure that you're buying the freshest possible oil, right? Because I think a lot of people put extra virgin olive oil in the same category as they do wine, thinking that there's some kind of value to be gained from an aged extra virgin olive oil. Which is absolutely not the case. So extra virgin olive oil, after its harvest date, it only gets worse. Now, it is highly protected by the antioxidants, some of which I've already mentioned, and the fact that it's generally comprised of very chemically stable fatty acids. Nonetheless, you want to make sure that you're buying the freshest oil that you can find. So the best oils are going to come with a harvest date on the bottle. Cheaper oils likely won't come with a harvest date. So that's one way of making sure, as best you can, right? I mean, nothing is absolutely like guaranteed, but I think it's a good way to, ensure that the oil that you're buying is genuine by looking to see if there's a harvest date on the bottle, right? Manufacturers that are using fraudulent oils likely wouldn't put a harvest date. I'm assuming, that's just like me speculating there, but you want to make sure that you can see a harvest date, and you want to buy the freshest oil that you can find. You also want to make sure that you're buying a small enough bottle so as to allow you to use the oil as quickly as possible, because once you open it and that oil is exposed to oxygen, the degradation process will accelerate. Now, again, extra virgin olive oil is very chemically stable, so I wouldn't worry about this too much. But if you're a single person and you're buying a huge bottle of extra virgin olive oil that's just going to sit by your stove for a year as you slowly make your way down to the bottom, that's less than ideal. I would say if you're a single person, as I am, buy as small a bottle as you can find, use it, and then buy a new bottle. You want to make sure that you're buying it and using it, and you're always sort of replenishing your kitchen with fresh oil. If you're a family and you go through extra virgin olive oil more quickly, then I would say, buying a liter here and there is totally sensible. You want to make sure that the oil comes in glass. A dark bottle, I think, is ideal because light can help sort of catalyze the degradation process. and just regularly taste the oil, like taste it with a spoon. When I buy a new oil, I'm excited to bring it home and to taste it with a spoon, to like swish it around in my mouth and to get to know the oil. Because sometimes the characteristics of a good oil can be lost amid a recipe. And so for me, it's super exciting to taste the oil that I'm buying regularly.
And now, since you're such a connoisseur of olive oil over the years, is there a certain one that you stick with? It sounds like you try different ones.
Yeah, I do try different ones. It's a funny question, because I get asked all the time, like, what's your favorite brand? And for me, part of the experience of getting to know extra virgin olive oil is to not have like the one go-to brand. I mean, certainly there are brands that I really love, and will return to, but in general, I love sampling different oils. So yeah, I can't make any brand recommendations, but yeah, just try and also like don't I would say don't skimp. Like this is one of the few areas where I think like you should probably buy the most expensive oil that you can afford. I'm not saying buy the most expensive oil, period. I'm saying buy, if you can afford a better oil easily, then I would say that's one where you want to buy. I tend to choose also organic, but you don't even really have to, because like some of these smaller cultivars can't afford the organic certification, and yet they put great care into the harvesting of the oil. I will say that oils grown in parts of the world that have more sort of there's more sort of environmental stress yields an oil that has a higher level of antioxidants. So, for example, olives that are grown in areas where there's greater risk of drought, actually the olives tend to produce a more potent oil. This sort of goes back to something that David Sinclair talks about a lot, like a stressed plant yields more of these so-called plant defense compounds that I know the carnivores love to hate, but they sort of pass that resilience onto you, which I think is a really cool way to think about the symbiosis of living things.
That is really neat. It's like hormesis in humans, going into the sauna, doing a cold plunge, making us stronger if we don't push it too hard.
Yeah.
Same thing in plants.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Max, you talked about protein quickly there earlier on. If we come back to the video, the protein you recommend in that one is wild salmon. So talk about why that one is especially good and why including it in this salad is so important.
Yeah, so wild salmon is it's a powerful brain food. I mean, fish is controversial these days. I think many people have seen, whether it's a documentary on Netflix or follow certain carnivore accounts that claim that because our oceans are becoming increasingly more polluted, that it's all downside to consume fish. But that's simply not the case. We have to look at all foods from a risk-benefit analysis, and the benefits of eating fish outweigh the risks. Fish are a very potent source of omega-3 fatty acids. A lot of people think that grass-fed beef, for example, is a source of omega-3 fatty acids. And you do get trace amounts of omega-3 fatty acids in grass-fed beef. You get about 1 to 200 milligrams, I believe, of omega-3 fats in grass-fed beef. But you get 2,000 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids in a comparable serving of wild salmon. So they're not even in the same ballpark in terms of their omega-3 content. And the omega-3s that you get in salmon are different than the omega-3s that you get in grass-fed beef. Actually, most people don't realize this, but in grass-fed beef, you do get a proportion of alpha-linolenic acid, which is the plant-based form of omega-3s in beef. But in wild salmon, it's all the most bioavailable plug-and-play forms of omega-3s that your body will begin utilizing right away. So in salmon, you get EPA and DHA fat, eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, which are the two forms of the omega-3 fatty acids that your body needs. And so great source of omega-3 fatty acids, which is, really important for brain health, for supporting membrane fluidity for your brain cells so that you can have, more energy, you can think with more clarity, have a better mood. And then also salmon, I think, is notable for a carotenoid that it contains called astaxanthin. I've been a big fan of astaxanthin for a number of years at this point, ever since I first read about it. It's an antioxidant that's found, it's a carotenoid. So similar to like we were talking about dark leafy greens and the carotenoids that they contain, Astaxanthin is a carotenoid found exclusively in marine animals. Algae generate it, and then salmon actually consume it. And the reason why algae generate astaxanthin is because algae sits at the top of the seabed, right, exposed to the damaging rays of the sun all day long. And so to protect themselves, to protect their DNA, they have to generate an incredibly powerful defense mechanism. And that defense mechanism for algae is astaxanthin. So it powerfully protects their cells from the ionizing radiation from the sun, right? I mean, sun is a great thing. Like, I love, spending time in the sun. I think the sun is very important. But when you're in the sun all day long, like algae is, right? You can't just get up and move into the shade. They need to generate defense mechanisms. And so this astaxanthin gets eaten up by salmon, which is what gives the salmon their characteristic red color. And then we get that same compound when we eat salmon. And studies have shown that astaxanthin can powerfully protect the skin against photoaging. It's not going to protect you, if you're in the sun for 12 hours a day necessarily. But it can definitely help to it imparts some level of protection to your skin, your eyes, as well as your brain. And in fact, one notable longevity researcher, Bruce Ames, published a paper a couple of years ago that I read, where he highlighted all of the sort of many food-based, what he called putative longevity agents. And astaxanthin was one of them. Like, he highlighted it as being a potential longevity agent, along with some other really great compounds like magnesium. And so, so salmon has that. And that's why I'm just a huge fan of consuming salmon. And studies show that people who are genetically at risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, if they eat a serving or two of fish a week, they see a significant risk reduction. And mothers who consume seafood when pregnant have offspring with greater cognitive abilities. So I'm a huge fan of seafood. I think it's one of these really important food categories. Certainly a food category that, like, our ancestors consumed, and probably contributed at least to the development of the human brain. And so it's something that I try to eat on a weekly basis.
I love how you brought up the fact that the algae is building this protective mechanism, and that we inherit through eating it that trait. And what that brought up for me while you're talking about it is what a cool way to think about eating, to eat from, across the spectrum, these special foods that have special properties that they've gained throughout their evolution, and then us harnessing that power by eating that food.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of amazing, it's like going back to the resilience of the olive, right? Like the olive cultivates a sort of grit when it's grown in regions of the world that are more stressed, right? And it passes that resilience onto you. Same with like, you could trace the algae to the salmon, and then we're ingesting that salmon and the compound that, like, originally was developed in the algae. To me, it's amazing. And so that's why I consider salmon, as well as dark leafy greens and extra virgin olive oil to be what I call genius foods, which is not a scientific term, but it's a term that, like, to me, it's like these are foods that really are giving your body and brain a tremendous amount of bang for their buck. And so wild fish is, and if you can't find salmon, or if you don't like salmon, there's also sardines are a great source of omega-3s. But in salmon, that's really where you get that astaxanthin compound, and you can supplement with it. I do take an astaxanthin supplement. And it's one of these, I have no affiliation with any, like, producer, but it's definitely like one of these compounds that I think is worth getting on a regular basis into your diet.
And when it comes to supplementation, do you supplement the EPA and DHA as well?
I do take a fish oil supplement. Yeah. So I try to get about 1 gram to 1.5 grams of combined EPA and DHA every day. And the form that I get is the triglyceride form. And so I have basically like a supplement downstairs. I believe it's 1 gram. I think it's 1,000 milligrams of combined EPA and DHA that I take on a daily basis. And I do that because it's shown to support cardiovascular health. It can help to reduce triglycerides. It can help to reduce blood pressure. There have been a number of trials to show that fish oil, especially for people who don't consume fish all that often, can help reduce inflammation and things like that. I consume fish on a fairly regular basis, but for me, it's just a way of it's added insurance. And then I take about 12 milligrams of astaxanthin every day. And astaxanthin is like all the other carotenoids, fat soluble. So you want to make sure that you're taking it with fat as well.
That makes sense. And I think this was more of a thing maybe like 10 years ago where people would talk about supplementing with fish oil and worrying about thinning the blood too much. And for somebody like you that's, consuming fish on a regular basis and supplementing with fish oil, is that something we need to be wary about, or is research proven that's not the case?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a fish oil scientist on my podcast recently, Bill Harris, who's pretty well known in the fish oil omega-3 space. Thrombosis is like a thing. Like people suffer from strokes. People, making sure that your blood is like nice and fluid. I think that's like an important one of these like important characteristics of what fish oil can do. But it doesn't do it like too much, in the sense that like you're often warned to stop taking fish oil before surgery, for example. But he said that that's like basically fake news, like that there's no real justification for that you can essentially, his perspective was that you can keep taking it. It's just added insurance.
Got it. Let's go deeper into the quality piece. You talked about grass-fed beef there, and we're talking about salmon now, and wild is a better choice, at least when possible, over farmed. How important is it in your mind when it comes to different meats, making sure we're getting that better quality and paying extra for that?
Yeah, it depends on where you're at, right? Like, I think I certainly love to buy for my house, when I'm bringing meat into my house, grass-fed, grass-finished beef. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that I live in Los Angeles. I have access to really pristine quality meat, and I can afford pristine quality meat, which I'm very grateful for. But if you say live in a food desert, if you don't have access to grass-fed, grass-finished beef, I still think it's important for people to know that beef is still quite healthy. It's a health food. Highly bioavailable source of many micronutrients. And also nutrients that are not necessarily essential, but are supportive of good health. So, for example, taurine or creatine or carnitine or carnosine, these are all very helpful micronutrients. It's a good source of protein, obviously a pristine source of protein. And what a cow eats dictates primarily the healthiness of its fat tissue. So if you don't have access to grass-fed beef, I would just buy, personally, what I would probably do is I would buy leaner meat. I would buy leaner cuts of meat, and I would learn how to cook those leaner cuts of meat in a way that helps break them down, makes them nice and tender and soft. If you're buying a perhaps tougher cut, but sometimes those tougher cuts can be cheaper. All you got to do is know how to cook them properly. And in my latest book, Genius Kitchen, I actually provide guidance for that. So yeah, I don't like supporting the factory farm system in any way, but that should be an allowable option for people, right? We can't be like perfectionists in our advocacy. But if you do have access, I do think grass-fed beef is worth the money. Grass-fed, grass-finished beef, you get less fat overall, which it still is going to contain plenty of that healthful fat. So I'm not like anti-fat, animal fat, in any sense, but you're getting a higher proportion of protein. So you're getting less fat, fewer fat calories, a higher concentration of protein. And the fat that grass-fed beef contains is going to be better for you. It contains about 5 times the omega-3s as compared to grain-finished beef. You're going to get a higher proportion of stearic acid, which is beneficial from a cardiovascular standpoint, and can actually support mitochondrial health. You get about 3 times the vitamin E in grass-finished beef, which is, I think, really important. Vitamin E is one of these fat-soluble antioxidants that directly supports brain health, because it supports fatty structures in your body and prevents lipids from oxidizing. And your brain is made of fat, and in particular, fats that are prone to oxidation. So I think grass-fed beef is definitely a great option. I consume it, 3 to 4 times a week. And also, for premenopausal women, it's the highest, it's the best source of highly bioavailable iron that there is. About 1 in 4 people globally suffer from anemia, and about half of those cases are attributed to iron deficiency. So, depending on the person listening to this, beef can be a form of medicine, which I know is controversial. The nutritional and medical orthodoxy might not agree with me, but when you actually look at what it is, it's to me, it's incontrovertible fact.
Well, one thing that becomes really apparent here talking to you today and reading your book, Genius Life, is that you are a big advocate of getting a good amount of quality protein on a regular basis. Whereas you have the different camps in the health and wellness space and in the conventional world, conventional is often big on with the food pyramid, pushing a lot of carbs. And then in the health and wellness space, our space, a lot of people these days are talking about more of a low carb, at least in my bubble, and a higher fat. So I'd like you to talk more about protein and why this is something that we should consider getting a good amount of good quality. You mentioned there a specific population, but as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody needs a framework on which to base their diet, right? Like a scaffolding on which to, okay, like this is sort of going to be the way that on a daily basis I think about my diet and food procurement, right? Maybe people don't think about it in terms as nerdy as I just described it, but for me, I think like thinking about a daily protein goal is a good way to sort of base your meals, because if that is the case, then you kind of look at your food in a different way. Like, is this food going to help me get closer to my goal, or is it going to lead me further from my goal? And I think it's a good framework because we know that high protein foods tend to be rich in other nutrients, right? Other nutrients, particularly nutrients of concern, nutrients that tend to be underconsumed today. And protein in general is important especially in the context of an obese population, of a largely obese population, because it's the most satiating macronutrient. So for me, I know that I'm striving for about 0.7 times my body weight of protein every day. And that formula works for me because I'm not necessarily trying to lose any weight. I'm more trying to maintain what I have and support my weight training, which I do on a fairly regular basis. You don't have to be a bodybuilder to reap benefits from this equation, but the research shows that 0.7 grams of protein times your ideal weight, whether it's your present weight or your goal weight, can optimally support your effort that you put into the gym. And we know that it's as I mentioned, highly satiating. So for me, that equates out to about 130 grams of protein every day. So if I'm striving to get about 130 grams of protein or maybe even a little bit more on a daily basis, I know that I have to, with each meal, hit a certain protein threshold. And because protein is so satiating, I try to focus on that first. In the meal, I try to build my plate around that protein. So, my first meal of the day, I'm going to have, some kind of protein source, whether it's like chicken or grass-fed beef or fish, maybe, a few eggs. I usually will do a protein shake or two midday, some Greek yogurt, maybe some like grass-fed beef jerky. And then at night for dinner, because I tend to eat 2 big meals and then I snack a little bit throughout the day, but I tend to pick high protein snacks and whole fruit. And then later in the day, I'm reaching for another like a protein source as the primary real estate holder on my plate. And protein, because it's so satiating, it makes me less hungry for energy, for carbs and fat. And I'm not demonizing carbs and fat, but generally, we eat plenty of it, whether we're intending to or not, because of just the way that the modern food environment is set up, right? Like the most tempting junk foods that your average person is gonna be in proximity to on a daily basis are predominantly comprised of carbs and fat, right? Now, when it comes to carbs, I think that carbs can be used as a performance enhancing tool. And I'm absolutely a huge fan of whole fruit. I'm a big fan of tubers like sweet potatoes, but generally I'm trying to add in fibrous like non-starchy vegetables for the fiber content. And whatever room I have left in my appetite, that's when I'll, have like more YOLO style foods, like, whether it's like a piece of chocolate or popcorn or whatever. But after that 130 grams of protein that I'm eating, I mean, I'm satiated, I'm not still hungry reaching for like rapidly digested sources of like energy. And that keeps me, I think, in a relatively lean body composition without having to obsess about calories and the like. Like my hunger mechanisms feel very much like they're naturally calibrated and attuned to what it is that I'm eating. Whereas, some of these like more modern, like newfangled creations, they drive overconsumption. But protein is not like, protein is self-limiting. It's highly satiating. And when we consume more protein, we tend to consume less carbs and fat. It's the protein leverage hypothesis at work.
You broke down a typical day of eating, which I appreciate. This longevity salad we're breaking apart here and getting into the nuances. When would you usually have that? Would that be, well, first of all, how often? And then would that be more of a lunch or a dinner for you?
Yeah, good question. I don't love having, I like for lunch, when I break my fast, I love to have a big salad. Like I'll go to one of these salad chains and I'll do that. I'm not as inclined to do that for dinner. For me, it's more soothing to have like, hot food and, maybe more like a stew or like a grilled meat or something, like a steak for dinner. So the salad is usually going to be like about 11 a.m. for me, 11 or 12 a.m. And I try to do that. I mean, I try to have a salad every day. I try to have a salad every day, whether it's like the primary focus of my meal as it is sometimes for lunch, or I'll have like a cup or two of greens like alongside a steak at dinner. But every day I try to like get some quantity of dark leafy greens in. Again, going back to that like Rush University study. And yeah, it works for me. Not everybody is gonna like the kinds of dark leafy greens that I like. For example, kale can be hard to digest for some people, so I don't try to push my exact meal onto other people. But like arugula is a great dark leafy green. I often will go for like the mixed greens, which is just sort of, I don't know exactly like the name of the types of leaves that they use in those, but like the mixed greens to me are very easily digested and super tasty. So. Every day pretty much.
Let's talk about your eating window piece. We know you're fasting until about 11 or 12, and you mentioned having more of a higher protein dinner, maybe a salad for lunch. Let's talk about what you have during that fasting window. So when do you close your fast? We know when you're going to open back up and start eating. And what might you have in the evening? Do you have any teas or anything specific when that window is closed? And then in the morning, what do you have before you break the fast? Like coffee, tea? What are you into?
Love this question. I'm definitely a fan of coffee. I cycle on and off coffee on a fairly regular basis, but for the most part, I'm on coffee. I just love it. It's something that I look forward to every morning. And the way that I take it is I drink it black with heavy cream in it. And the reason why I use heavy cream, and I've been sort of, I think for many people, I've helped put heavy cream back on the map. It's a great fat source. There's no carbs in it. There's no protein in it. It's just pure dairy fat, which is rich in a compound called milk fat globule membrane. A lot of people like to use butter in their coffee for similar reasons, but butter, the churning process disrupts this membrane that actually protects the fats and changes the way that we assimilate dairy fat. And studies show that you can feed a person heavy cream and butter, which are both the same base ingredient, right? Like butter, heavy cream is heavy cream, and butter starts out as heavy cream. It's just churned. But you'll see an adverse lipid response when you feed somebody butter that you won't see when you feed somebody heavy cream. And it's thought that the milk fat globule membrane that's present in heavy cream basically makes the triglycerides, the fats in dairy, beneficial to us. And also when you look at dairy fat, when an embryo is developing, the nervous system is the first structure to assemble. And so dairy, which is like, nature's first food, right? Actually has compounds in it that are quite supportive of brain health. And in fact, when they give infants, when they try with infants to give them either formula fortified with milk fat globule membrane or depleted of milk fat globule membrane, it's the milk fat globule membrane that leads to a cognitive boost. And so that totally checks out from the standpoint of evolution. That milk fat would have compounds in it that directly support brain health. And in fact, when you break apart these essentially lipoproteins that comprise this membrane, it's full of phosphatidylcholine and sphingomyelin, which are compounds that are, sphingomyelin is one of the core constituents of myelin, which insulates neurons. And so I love getting that with heavy cream. Like you're concentrating it in heavy cream, and you're making the polyphenols in coffee more bioavailable in doing so, because these are fat soluble compounds. Polyphenols in general are not very bioavailable, but you are helping to improve their bioavailability somewhat by ingesting coffee with a fat source. You're blunting the infusion of caffeine. So to me, it makes coffee, you're less prone to getting jitters from it. And also it doesn't perturb, you're, I guess in the most technical sense, breaking a fast when you consume coffee with heavy cream, but you're not perturbing any of the pathways that I think we aspire to keep activated when we are fasting. So I think the major question that people should ask when asking themselves whether or not this food or that food is going to quote unquote break their fast, why are you fasting to begin with? Are you fasting to keep to maintain a low insulin state? Well, if that's the case, then fat is not going to elevate insulin, right? So you can have a fat source if it's exclusively fat when you're fasting, and you can rest assured that in the functional sense, you're not breaking your fast, right? Because you're not causing insulin to be elevated. With coffee and heavy cream, you're also not consuming any protein. Now, if your goal for fasting is to keep some of those protein sensing pathways depressed, like mTOR, for example, well, you don't have to worry about that either, because there's no protein to be found in heavy cream. Half and half has protein. Whole milk has protein in it. Even almond milk has a little bit of protein in it, right? But with heavy cream, it's just pure fat. So for me, in the functional sense, maybe not the technical sense, but in the functional sense, it doesn't break a fast. And so that's generally what I consume, along with some like spring water in the window prior to me having that salad.
Okay, let's talk about the night now. So when do you close your eating window? And then are there certain things that you allow, say in that few hours before you go to bed, to still be quote unquote fasting?
So I don't always succeed at this. Just to be really transparent, I try to curtail my consumption of food about 2 to 3 hours before I go to sleep. But I'm a social animal, and I often will binge watch shows with my brothers, and sometimes like if he has a bowl of popcorn out, maybe I'll snack a bit. But when I'm really, I think like living the ideal, I won't eat for, I'll have like an earlier dinner at about 7 p.m., which right now the sun is like starting to go down at 7 p.m. And then I won't eat, much after that. And I think that makes sense from the standpoint of cardiometabolic health. If you are trying to, and this comes back to like what your goals are. If your goals are to maximize, like, for example, muscle anabolism, which, sometimes during the year, maybe that happens to be my goal, right? Then maybe like eating some protein before you go to sleep can be beneficial, because studies do show that when you eat protein before you go to sleep, you're maximizing muscle protein synthesis, and you're reducing muscle protein breakdown with that sort of even spread of protein throughout the day. But generally, for longevity, for my cardiometabolic health, I try to stop eating for 2 to 3 hours before I go to sleep. And in that sort of fasting window, I'm drinking a little bit of water, perhaps, maybe some herbal tea, but that's generally it. I try not to drink too much water close to bed, because having to wake up to pee in the middle of the night is not so fun. but yeah, just non-caloric, non-caffeinated beverages in the hours before bed.
Are you somebody who tests your sleep with something like the Aura Ring?
I do have an Aura Ring. I have no financial affiliation. I paid for it, and I do enjoy it because I think it gamifies sleep. I don't know how accurate it is, but for me, it does feel somewhat accurate in the sense that when it tells me, or when it when it reflects that I'm uh, at my most sort of ready, I do tend to feel really well rested on those days, and feel like I'm ready for anything. So I think it's just like a way to gain insight into the processes that occur during sleep. I don't think you need one. I think it's generally it's great to be able to cultivate your own inner compass. But yeah, I've found it to be, for me personally, I would say that it was worth the expense to buy. I enjoy having it. I don't use it every night. Sometimes it runs out of batteries and I just have it like sitting. But in general, I think it's a fun little tool to have. I don't think it's as useful for the activity side of things. I don't track my activity. My iPhone automatically tracks my steps. I think iPhones automatically track steps. I think that's a useful metric to have. But yeah, in terms of sleep tracking, I think the Aura is a pretty good device.
Well, the reason I ask about the Aura Ring specifically is you mentioned there, you have those nights when you're hanging out with your brothers and maybe having some popcorn later than you normally would. Have you seen an objective difference on those nights when it comes to, how much deep sleep, how much REM sleep you get versus taking that 2-3 hours to fast before bed?
Yeah. What I've found is that carbs before bed can support sleep quality. They do this by keep making sure that your cortisol stays suppressed. So carbs before bed can be helpful. This is one of the reasons why I think some people suffer in terms of their sleep on very low carb diets. Uh, so I think like we shouldn't. If carbs before bed help you sleep better, then you should keep doing what you're doing. So I do notice that sometimes. On the other hand, like a heavy dose of protein can sometimes impair my sleep. Like if I eat steak, for example, too close to bedtime, that can definitely impair my sleep. I also notice, independent of food, light exposure can impair my sleep. If I'm watching a TV show and this doesn't always happen, but like if there's a very bright scene or something, like I notice that that the next day I'll have some kind of like light hangover, and I'll see that reflected in the Aura Ring. So yeah, it does provide, I think, insight, and it like affirms. It can be used to like affirm like hypotheses that I have about my own sleep. Like like before I had the Aura Ring, I didn't necessarily know what the light was doing to my sleep, but now with the Aura Ring, it's like it sort of can like help me confirm those hypotheses. But yeah, in general, like when I stop, because I do tend to have carbs with dinner. Like I'm not on a ketogenic diet or anything like that. So I do notice that even when I stop eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, like my sleep is still very good.
That's good. I believe earlier you touched on this when it comes to food, where every food we're going to eat is going to have pros and cons. And I think this ties into what you're talking about now, where if you decide to stay up a little bit later and watch some TV at night and be social with your brothers, there's certain pros you're going to get from a social act such as that versus staying home and fasting. So, which will provide other benefits. So what I like about this is it's a really gentle, zoomed out approach at health. And I know for me, the longer I've been in this game, the more and more I'm taking that middle ground as well and realizing there is, pros and cons to everything.
Well said. Yeah, there are definitely pros and cons to everything. We can't be dogmatic. I mean, I find that like, a lot of the vegan proponents as well as carnivore proponents are so dogmatic in their approach. And you don't need to be that dogmatic to attain optimal health these days. I think you don't. I think you have to leave about 10 to 20% of your diet and lifestyle to YOLO, YOLO foods or YOLO activities. Because I mean, first of all, like, yeah, as you mentioned, social engagement and being a part of the world, not isolated from it, I think is really important from the standpoint of good mental health, but also physical health. Like mental health, having good mental health creates good physical health. And we know, for example, that social disconnect is a risk factor for dementia. So you don't want to like isolate yourself from the world and try to strive for this like perfect view of, of ancestral like living. Like I think that doesn't make any sense today. But also like, there is a degree of like hormesis that occurs with like not doing everything absolutely perfectly all the time, right? Like I was thinking about this earlier, the carnivores, for example, and they, the fact that like, any type of plant toxin they want to like keep out of their bodies, but like that's not how you cultivate resilience, like you don't cultivate resilience by avoiding completely these so-called plant toxins, right? To me, it makes sense that the carnivore diet, like which is a an elimination diet, a very extreme elimination diet, can be a therapeutic diet for some. But the analogy that I would draw is, if you are a type 2 diabetic and you go on a low carbohydrate diet, so type 2 diabetes is essentially glucose intolerance. So if you go on a very low carbohydrate diet and you see your blood sugar levels, flatline, you're managing your disease with that very low carbohydrate diet. But does that necessarily mean that you've cured your type 2 diabetes and that you've regained insulin sensitivity? Not necessarily, right? You've still got to like lose the weight, lose the ectopic fat to regain your insulin sensitivity, right? So for me, a carnivore who's just completely avoiding all of these plant so-called toxins, right? Yeah, they're reducing their exposure to these compounds, but in so doing, they're not cultivating gut resilience, right? And I think gut resilience is one of these things that we've lost as a species, right? Like, or I should say, as a society, because of our over-reliance on antibiotics, our hyper-sterile, whether it's the hyper-sterile hospital environment or, more broadly speaking, how we're raised. We want to cultivate resilience, and I think like, integrating these kinds of like so-called plant toxins are really helpful in that regard. They're really helpful. And that's why we see that people who consume, I think that's why we see that people who consume more vegetables, they have better health because they're perhaps more resilient, right? Like we didn't make it here through eons of evolution to be taken down by a peanut, right? For people who have very strong allergies, I think that's like a sign that we've a very clear sign, and the rampant autoimmunity that we're seeing now in society is a clear sign that we've lost a degree of resilience. And I don't think like extricating ourselves from like these so-called plant toxins is a way to foster resilience. I think it's actually like putting your head in the sand and thinking that you're fostering resilience when you're not.
Makes sense to me. And Max, you touched on weight loss there. And you mentioned earlier how you're not somebody that counts calories and you maintain with this diet and lifestyle that you've evolved to now. You maintain a healthy weight, which is amazing. And that's where I've come to as well. And I'm sure a lot of people, after they work out a lot of the foundational things that we talk about, find themselves there. But for somebody who's tuning in, I think what brings a lot of people to a show like this or to health and wellness is the weight loss piece. And we talked about earlier the time-restricted eating window, and that's a powerful tool for losing weight. If somebody comes to you with the knowledge you've gained over all these years being in this space and they want to lose weight and say they're somewhere on that continuum, either type 2 diabetic, obese, or just starting to gain a little bit of extra weight, I'm assuming intermittent fasting would be a piece of that. You can elaborate on that. But what other tools and strategies do you recommend to people?
Yeah, so I mean, intermittent fasting, studies show, is beneficial when it comes to weight loss. It's not more beneficial than regular old calorie counting, right? But it is a strategy that I think can help for people. So if it works for you, keep doing it. And there are some people that it doesn't work for. So it's not magic, but I think people, it's important to know that the foods that people tend to eat after dinner tend to be junk foods, right? They tend to be the foods that we eat while we're sitting around the TV watching TV. And those foods, the vast majority of the time, are junk foods, right? They're carbs and fat. There's some packaged food that people snack on. So eliminating those foods right off the bat is going to be helpful for somebody on a weight loss journey. Being more present with your food, I think, is really important, right? So this isn't even talking about food quality necessarily, but just being more present with your food. Studies show that people who are distracted while they're eating eat about 15% more calories. Making sure you're well slept. People who are underslept tend to consume about 400 to 500 more calories the next day. So making sure that you're focusing on your sleep. Again, we're not even talking about the food yet. Making sure that all those sort of like lifestyle factors, right? When it comes to the actual food, I think what you want to do with your strategy is minimize the area under the curve of suffering. And you want to do this, I think, ideally without having to count calories. Counting calories works for some people, but without counting calories, you can absolutely get into a healthy body composition. Like me. Now, this is just purely an anecdote, but I don't count calories and I'm able to maintain a healthy body composition. I'm not shredded, but like I generally sit at about 15% body fat, right? So that's a body fat percentage that I'm totally happy with. If you want to get to 11, 10, 10%, you're probably gonna have to count calories at that point. But that's like, that's again, you're trying to get like to a more shredded level, and that's where like being a little bit more meticulous is going to come into play. But who says that that's like a healthier body composition to be that shredded anyway, right? Like at this point, I think I'm fairly lean and my hormone levels are great and all of my my lipids are great. So that, again, anecdote, but all that is to say that you shouldn't need to count calories to get to a healthy body composition, whether you're a male or a female. Now, when it comes to what to eat, as I mentioned, you want to minimize the area under the curve of suffering. If you're taking your obesogenic food and you're just trying to moderate your consumption of those foods, like the eat less dictum, right? Like just take whatever it is that you're currently eating and eat less of it. Assuming you're overweight or obese, then that's a recipe for failure because chances are the kinds of foods that you're eating are hyperpalatable foods that make it really difficult to moderate your consumption, right? Studies show that when people opt for higher quality foods, so minimally processed whole foods, they tend to come in effortlessly at a calorie deficit of about 300-400 calories. Conversely, people that are eating to satiety, ultra processed foods, they end up eating a calorie surplus of about 500 calories. So again, like people tend to get this advice to just eat less, and so then what they do is they focus on the quantity of food that they're eating. But what needs to be said is that the quality dictates the quantity. So what you're eating actually dictates to a significant degree how much you're eating. So I think upping the quality of your food and focusing on protein is going to help you get full, right? Like we're not designed to eat until we're 50% full. We're designed to eat until our stomachs stretch, right? And so that hunger hormone ghrelin turns off. And so for you to really reap the benefits of that hardwired biological maxim, you want to really focus on protein and fiber, which we don't have a biological necessity for, but fiber helps to mechanically stretch out the stomach. And just to show you how effective this is, protein, more so than carbs and fat, when we eat protein, elevates a hormone called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1 in the body, right? Now, this is a hormone that is involved in satiety. It's involved in digestion. It slows digestion. There's a revolutionary, I said that weird, there's a revolutionary weight loss drug on the market now called semaglutide. Okay, it's FDA approved for blood sugar under the trade name Ozempic, and then for weight loss, it's actually called Wegovy. And when I say revolutionary, I mean this drug, while patients are on it, obese patients, they lose about 20% of their body weight. And what it is, it's a GLP-1 agonist, so it acts like GLP-1 in the body. You can get the same benefits of this drug by just eating a high protein diet, like focusing on protein. You're not going to eat too much protein because protein is so self-limiting. But just if you strive towards a high protein diet, it's basically you're getting all the benefits of this drug. And in fact, people tend to gain weight when they come off the drug because they haven't built the habits, like the healthy habits that it takes to maintain successful weight loss without the use of a drug, right? So you're getting all the benefit by shifting your diet towards a higher protein percentage, while also building in the healthy habits that are going to help you to sustain that weight loss. So that's why, for me, I think protein is the most powerful leverage tool that there is when it comes to shifting your body composition to a healthier state, getting the extra fat off, and supporting your musculature, and all those good things.
Love that. I want to talk more about the exercise piece, which you briefly just brought up, the musculature. So basically, classically, when, say your doctor or a dietitian or nutritionist is helping you lose weight, they're going to talk about calories and exercise, lowering the calories, expending more energy through exercise. I'd love to hear your thought, because again, you just briefly touched on that piece. You gave a lot of great information when it comes to diet, but how do you feel about exercise and how it ties into the weight loss piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think exercise it's so important for so many systems. I mean, I like to say that exercise is like taking a shotgun to your problems, because it affects so many different pathways. But with regard to weight loss specifically, I think lifting weights is crucially important. I mean, it creates a hormonal milieu in the body that helps to drop fat, and it helps to preserve and build muscle. Muscle is a glucose sink. So for the sugar and carbs that we eat, muscle is a great storage system, basically for sugar and carbs that we consume, which is inevitable. Like, I mean, we're going to eat carbs are not bad, right? And those carbs can actually fuel our activity. Building muscle is a great way to support insulin sensitivity, which we talked about, right? Like you can diet down your blood sugar levels, certainly, but one way to actually like dramatically improve your to actually like fix the pathology of type 2 diabetes is to build muscle, is to resistance train. So I think that's crucially important. It helps to boost your metabolism, your resting metabolic rate, not by a huge margin, but muscle is metabolically expensive. So having more muscle in your body actually raises your basal metabolic rate. So it actually boosts your metabolism. And it helps you look better naked. I mean, it's just like, it's so incredibly valuable. And studies show that actually having more muscle in the body directly supports brain health as well, which, I'm incredibly passionate about. And I think cardio is valuable as well, but I think people need to think about cardio not for the calories that it allows you to burn, but for supporting cardiovascular health. And you can do cardio, you can sort of like do a weight training regimen that has a cardio aspect to it by shortening the time between your sets, or by just walking vigorously. But I think if you enjoy, I think it's beneficial to find a form of cardio, whether it's bike riding or vigorous walking or what have you, that you enjoy, and do that. Because I mean, the cardiovascular system, boosting your aerobic capacity is going to benefit your ability to put on muscle, and vice versa. So I think both play a super important role, but we can't think about exercise just as a way of burning calories. I think that's the wrong way to do it. Calories, the majority of calories that you burn over the course of the day are going to come from non-exercise physical activity, which we attribute to NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this can be anything from chasing your cat around the house, which would be, how I get, I think, a lot of my NEAT, to walking more regularly, taking the stairs when given the opportunity, parking further from the entrance to the supermarket. But NEAT is incredibly valuable. You burn some like crazy like amount more calories doing that than you could ever aspire to burn like in the gym setting. So yeah, those three modalities, and I talk about them in my book, The Genius Life, very important, especially for somebody on a weight loss journey, but for anybody really.
Let's come back to the sleep piece. This is something that not a lot of people are talking about. And you quickly touched on the fact that when we don't have a good sleep, we're going to take in more calories the next day as a general rule. I'm curious, is that relationship because of hormones and changes with those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, there's definitely a hormonal aspect to it. We tend to be a little bit more insulin resistant on the day after a shortened night of sleep. So that impairs glucose tolerance, but also there's a neurobiological aspect to it. So our prefrontal cortex, there's less activity in the part of the brain that's responsible for executive function. When we're underslept, we become more reptilian in our desires on a day that we're underslept. So that tends to lead us to reach for more calorie dense foods, energy dense foods that would have helped us, in a time of food insecurity, which was true for the majority of our time on this planet, helped us procure our survival, right? To reach for foods that are just more calorie dense. And so, yeah, meta-analyses show that on a night of shortened sleep, we tend to consume about 400 additional calories the next day. And those calories tend to come from like sugary rich, like carbs and fat, like junk foods, essentially. So sleep is really an important piece of this, like making sure that you're well slept. It's like sleep is like the activity that raises all the boats in the harbor. If you sleep well, it's going to support your exercise recovery. It's going to support your appetite. It supports emotional regulation. It directly supports brain health. It supports your hormonal milieu. When you sleep early on in the night, actually, you get this pulse of growth hormone and of testosterone. So yeah, I mean, sleep is like a non-negotiable, which I know is like, difficult to hear for anybody who's like a new parent. My brother is actually going through this, so I'm living vicariously, but I just became an uncle and he's like, he's a new parent and this is his first child. So he's, the sleep is like hard to come by these days, but it is really important. Super important.
Congrats to you. Is this the first niece or nephew?
Yeah. I just became an uncle. It's the first baby in the Lugavere family, and she's a little girl, so it's pretty cool. First girl too in the family, which is a trip.
That's awesome. Okay, Max, I want to make sure before we part ways, I know we only have a few minutes left, that we come full circle. We started talking about this longevity salad, 5 ingredients. We've covered 3. We got to talk about berries and nuts and why they contribute to longevity. And then what are your favorites within those categories?
Yeah, so berries are great. And, to be fair, berries, a lot of the research showing that berries are beneficial are funded by the Berry Board. But that's just you got to take the good with the bad in nutrition research. And studies show that people who regularly consume berries have more youthful brains by about 2.5 years. All berries have different sort of benefits. So like in strawberries, you get a longevity compound called fisetin. In blueberries, you get anthocyanins, which is a class of compounds that have been shown to aggregate in the brain's memory center and directly protect brain cells from aging and decay. So I'm a huge fan of berries. They're a low sugar fruit. Ideally, you want to find like wild berries, but also organic. I think berries are great. I tend to buy organic berries. I don't buy organic for everything, but with berries, I tend to reach for organic. And then with nuts, I think nuts are also great. They can be easy to overconsume. They're one of the most, I know I advocate for whole food consumption, and nuts are indeed whole foods, but they're among the most calorie dense. And I think part of the reason why they're so easy to overconsume is that we no longer have to like shell them ourselves, that we tend to buy them and we're able to eat them by the handful. So you want to be careful with nuts. My strategy is to integrate them into recipes. And I tend not to just eat them out of the bag, with the exception of like Brazil nuts. I'll usually eat 2 to 3 Brazil nuts a day for the selenium content. But yeah, research shows that people who eat more nuts tend to be protected from a whole array of chronic health conditions, whether they're respiratory diseases, kidney diseases, cardiovascular disease, neurological conditions. So nuts have a lot going for them. You want to make sure that they're either raw, ideally soaked. Soaked can really help reduce some of the anti-nutrients in nuts, which I tend not to be very concerned about. But if you're splitting hairs, soaked nuts can be beneficial, make them easier to digest. And with regard to the types of nuts, I love almonds because they're a great source of vitamin E as well as magnesium. But a handful of almonds, you get 25% of your daily magnesium intake, which is another one of these putative longevity compounds. Like magnesium is super important. It's underconsumed by about half of the population. really important for DNA repair, for energy synthesis. So almonds have a lot going for them. The vitamin E and the magnesium in particular, I think, are really great. I also really like pistachios. There was a 2022 meta-analysis. Actually, I just tweeted it, that found that consuming pistachios can help improve various markers of metabolic health, reducing, and this was independent of a weight effect. So like independent of like calories. It seems that pistachios can improve systolic blood pressure, triglycerides, blood sugar, things like that. So I'm a huge fan of pistachios. And pistachios, among all nuts, also contain those carotenoids that are also found in dark leafy greens. So lutein and zeaxanthin, you also find them in pistachios, which are what give pistachios their like yellow-orange hue. So they're great. I'm a huge fan of pistachios.
All right, Max, we've completed the salad. This is a great recipe, and I'm definitely going to take it on with my own modifications. So thank you for that. And just thank you for the work you're doing and all the great books you're writing and your podcast. I really appreciate you and all the great work you're doing out in the world. And thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you, brother. Always a pleasure. And I hope this was valuable. Thanks for having me.
Now that you're done my conversation with Max, stick around here and catch my chat with Sal, where you're going to learn even more about weight loss. I'll see you over there.
There's this belief that workouts need to be grueling, grinding, painful, crazy sessions.